Hey, solopreneurs, Gabe here. Today we have Sarah Fruehling of Fruehling Coaching and Facilitation. She's going to help us discover our best selves. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Sarah, thank you for being on Solopreneur Money today.
Thanks for having me, Gabe. It's just a delight to be here, and I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about how to discover our best selves, which is one of your I guess what I'll say, areas of expertise as a coach. And so what I would love to do is have you go into that. But before we go there, let's hear your story.
All right, I'd love to share it. I actually think they're both related because I have a deep belief that my own personal growth and evolution and journey towards self actualization is part of me showing up as my best self. So, it's interesting. My first career for 23 plus years was that I was a private practice mental health therapist. And in about 2015, a friend of mine who has been extremely successful, an impact leader and a multimillionaire, invited me to lunch. He was back in our hometown. Um, and we sat and we had this very long lunch together. It was interesting. And at the end of the lunch, he said to me, Sarah, what we just had is extraordinary. You have no idea how many people would benefit from having a conversation like this with you. And at the time, he was going through some life challenges, and he actually brought a list. You might have seen it, the emotional guidance scale. It's the idea of different emotions, and some bring you downward, your mood into a downward spiral, and some bring you into an upward spiral. And he was sharing where he was, and he asked me, where was I? And for me, my number was kind of in the neutral zone. Or so ideally you're in 1 through 7. That's kind of in the neutral between 7 and 8. 8 is bored.
Hmm.
And as a mental health therapist, I was definitely in my zone of competence, maybe even my zone of excellence. I loved what I was doing. I loved how I was making a difference, kind of one family, one couple, one individual in a quiet, small way. And at the same time, all of the things of electronic health records, the pathologization of individuals, whole lot of things were happening at that time that took a lot of the joy and delight of what I actually got to do with clients. Like the balance, it got way out of whack. So this friend really ignited an idea in me because he said, gosh, you should become a professional executive coach. I know dozens of my colleagues and friends who are multimillionaires who need this kind of reasonable, rational, confidential sounding board that's a feminine perspective. And, Gabe, the story from that was I was super interested in it. The idea was sparked. I looked into it. And always I know when I'm in alignment with my highest calling, things kind of just fall into place. And that's really what happened. Like the next month, I signed up for training. I didn't have any awareness at that time of what my background in positive psychology, cognitive behavioral health, strength-based therapy was going to provide for me as an executive coach, because it's really created this micro niche. So I went from, being a small town girl in the heartland of America, as a private practice therapist, to launching a new career, creating a business plan, then falling so in love with coaching that it led to me accelerating that plan, actually letting go of all of my therapy clients and my therapy practice. And we moved, 2.5, 3 hours away to a larger city because my coaching business exploded there. So that was 2015, 2016. Since then, now I've added 4 coaches who I get to collaborate with on my team and 2 strategic planners. I have an integrator or a business manager, a virtual assistant. We've gone from regional clients to global clients, and Omaha specific, me, my first assistant and the first coach who joined me, we were all in Omaha. To now I've got coaches and people on my team all over the United States. So it's just been delightful.
That is amazing. That is interesting. You said something that kind of piqued my interest. You said the I can't hardly say it. Pathologi I'll let you
Pathologization. Yes.
there we go. Pathologization. Pathologization. I gotta say it one more time just to get that out. Pathologization. What does that mean?
Well, so when I first started to feel some of this burnout, as a therapist, there were a couple things that were happening. At the time, it was just before the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Manual, the fifth edition came out in 2015. And I had a friend who sat on the mental health board here of Nebraska, and he had informed me, hey, Sarah, when DSM-5 comes out, you're going to start needing to give 4 diagnoses, if you can, and then systematically drop them to prove medical necessity. And Gabe, I just fundamentally disagree with that. I think that we are whole human beings. We may have holes, HOLE, or parts that are missing in our skill set or our emotional intelligence or abilities, but we are whole. Even if we are wounded, I always use that term, we are wounded well.
Interesting. Very interesting.
So I don't believe that, I just don't believe that fundamentally we are damaged. Um, so that really felt out of alignment with what I believe. And coaching, then, which is very strength based and future focused, as opposed to counseling, which is past focused, problem focused, coaching really ended up feeling much more aligned with what I love and who I am and how I work.
That makes total sense. It reminds me of the same story that everybody has when they decide to go out on their own. It's that same story. It's like, I don't want to serve my clients this way. I want to serve them that way. I don't want to run my business this way. I want to run it that way. And so you had, it's a very similar story to mine, where, all right, here's some additional regulations or some additional things that we're going to continue to put on your plate that you don't totally either need or want or, like you said, believe in, that
Yeah.
allowed you to go, all right, this is telling me I need to move on,
Yeah.
which is really interesting, how your journey, that what I would call initially the solopreneur journey, leaving to go start something else.
Right. It's interesting. I had somebody recently ask me about my first career, and I was self-employed private practice. And I always say I was a mental health therapist and an entrepreneur, because even then I worked for myself. Very quickly, I realized I don't want to have a boss. I want to be able to manage my own schedule, my time. I want to be in control of who I get to work with, and I knew even then intuitively that where the greatest joy and fulfillment is, not only for me, but also for my clients, is when we really connect deeply. So you're right. What you named is exactly true for me. And then all of the additional work of electronic health records and all that just made it's almost like all of the burden of that kind of overshadowed the joy of what I was getting to do. And it led to this pivotal moment in time and conversation with my friend. And I think actually it's allowed me to step into my zone of genius, which if you would have asked me in 2014, 2015, I wouldn't have even known what that meant. So now I know it truly to the core of my being. So it's been a really beautiful growth trajectory and this self-discovery, journey of self-discovery.
It sounds like it. I mean, that's the piece that I'm going, man, that is amazing. And here's the next question that I have is okay, that was a pivotal, very pivotal lunch in your lifetime.
Yeah.
Did you act right away or did you let it sit and marinate for a while? And for lack of any other way to put it, did you listen to the whispers or did you push the whispers away? I mean, where did that go for you?
That's an excellent question, and I would say the way I'm wired, so if you've ever done your Kolbe or you know anything about the Kolbe assessment, I am a high quick start, which means I have the idea, I'm ready to jump in. However, I also recognize that I thought quite a bit about the podcast coming up and my own relationship to money, how I've managed money, my choices around money, and I realized as I mined my past to look for guidance for moving in the future, that the same thing occurred. If I look at moments in time where I made a huge leap in my career, every time it was because there was some compelling, something so exciting I had such a hell yes for that no really wasn't an option. So on this, I was very energized. The idea ignited. I'm kind of a brain nerd. So I had this explosion of ideas, which now I know. Like if I do a client interview and I have an explosion of ideas, I know, oh, that's a hell yes client. Like this is somebody I want to work with. When I do that in my own life, I recognize intuitively, listen, there's a knowing, a sense of being, this is the direction to move your energy in. So actually, it happened very quickly. We had the lunch, and I think a month later, I was on a plane to Santa Barbara to get training. And a month after the training, I'd launched a new website and made a business plan for that year. I'm going to transition and do half the time coaching and half the time therapy. And then the coaching was so much fun that when within 9 months, I had either had closure with all of my current clients or found them a therapist to work with them, which was very hard. Like people don't talk about when you have that exponential growth, how each transition then there's emotions and there's work to be done personally, within the relationship, professionally. So every time there are also those kinds of challenges and growth opportunities for me.
Yeah, interesting. You are a quick start. Holy crap. I mean, that
Yeah.
was quick. That was really quick. To go from a lunch to literally in business within 9 months at a level that is like, okay, I've already transitioned all my clients away. It's time to step into this, or most of them, or started to. I mean, that's very impressive, and you are correct. Every time we level up, and I know it's a word used a ton, leveling up, but every time we level up and we take another step up, it's amazing. More stuff comes up, more challenges, more opportunities, more things to work through, which is really quite interesting. So I'm going to use that as my transition to you sharing and who you work with. You work with highly, highly successful people. And so the interesting thing is their problems are the same as a lot of our problems. And so I'd love to have you share that, but then let's move into what are the things that you're doing to help them discover our best selves? And then how can we apply that to little old us listening to the podcast at the time?
Right. Right, wonderful. So the clientele that I love to work with are impact leaders, and I'm personally driven by my core value to create positive ripples of impact. And through my coaching, I actually get to support that on a greater stage by working with impact leaders because I get to support them in making the world a better place through our coaching. So I often think about my clients as impact leaders. Generally, they're incredibly successful. If we look at what they've achieved, financial success, or they are people who have a really unique zone of genius, and they want to create that kind of incredible success, and they see that I have a unique zone of genius to help bring that out in them. Um, so that answered the first question. What was the next part? You had a multi-stepped question.
Yeah, I'm kind of notorious for that. I apologize. The next question is okay, what are the things that you're doing with them, which is part of your unique zone of genius that you're doing with them to pull out their best selves? And what are the things that you're going through with them that you then can transition down to, like I said, little or less?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess I could share that the latest thing that I'm fascinated with, and I'm researching actually, is so many of my clients have a unique zone of genius. So they're impact leaders, but they also have some kind of neurodiversity, which means just basically that you think differently than other people. And so you could think Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, somebody where you go, oh, brilliant mind. And something's a little quirky there. I realized, so if I tie this back to my first career and your comment that you said just a little bit ago about everybody has something, what I realized as I started working with impact leaders with really significant financial success is that they have so much pressure on them. Everybody really does have something, and we don't think that. We get disconnected from that through social media. I know we get everybody else's highlight reel when we're living our actual lives. Leaders, whether you're making $1 million or $1 billion or $100,000, have that same kind of pressure. And you also have everything going on in your personal life and in the lives of your leadership team and the people who work for you. And so I had no idea, Gabe, when I started, that I would be able to create this real micro niche of leveraging that, my fascination with cognitive behavioral work, strength based approaches to things, and positive psychology. And the fact that I'm just a brain nerd, so I'm super interested in leveraging what we do naturally with our brains. I bring all of that to these clients. Many of the leaders that I work with would fall under, like that type A, super driven, masculine energy of push things, force things through. And what I've learned, and I think the gift that I bring, is helping that individual actually embrace, have a confidential sounding board, and then embrace their zone of genius, which is actually effortless. So if we can get the right people underneath them to do the operations and elevate them to their zone of genius, then it happens in this really kind of magical, more creative way. In nature, what resonated with me is the Fibonacci sequence. Do you know that? It's a mathematical sequence.
Hmm.
It's actually like a spiral that is expanding. And a lot of things in nature are built on the Fibonacci sequence. So we see it in pine cones and the way the seeds in a sunflower grow, in rose petals as they unfurl. It's in our thumbprints. It's in a spiral galaxy, which the Milky Way galaxy, our galaxy, is. The way it is expanding is in accordance to the Fibonacci sequence. So I love this because an orange tree doesn't work hard to force oranges to come out. In fact, it's effortless. It just naturally, that's what it does. So if I can help my clients discover their zone of genius where it really is effortless, it's fun, it's joyful, it leads to this deep fulfillment at a real soul level. And it is my story as well. It's exactly what I've been going through as I have learned to delegate and elevate more and more into my own zone of genius.
Interesting. So you're helping your clients discover their zone of genius but then helping them figure out what they have to do to allow them to stay in their zone of genius. Is that a good way to put it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So what once you go there, where do you go next? I mean, what happens a lot of times in your I assume you have some type of a process.
You know, it's a really interesting thing. I think that I have multiple processes. So I'm a web thinker,
Mhm.
meaning I'm also very neurodivergent. I can pull things from all over the place, like you would think of in a spider web, to
Mhm.
come to a conclusion or a possible solution. If you're a linear thinker, you think much more like 1 plus 1 equals 2.
Mhm.
A web thinker would say, "Oh, well, 1 plus 1 equals 2, but there's a million ways to get to 2. You could take 10 and subtract 8 or 0.25 to, on and on and on." Um, so I often share with my clients that what we do is we co-create. So I don't really have a process. For example, leadership coaching, I always think of as kind of buying a suit off the rack.
Mhm.
What I do is much more catered, where I co-create that with a client. We're not only tailoring the suit, we're picking out the fabric, the buttons, the thread, and we're creating something brand new specifically for that person. So I would say I have a whole lot of processes, and I pull in what's relevant for each client, kind of in an intuitive, that's part of my zone of genius way, as we work together.
Interesting. And have you always done it like that, or was that something that has developed over time? Did that come from as a result of your counseling and your therapy background?
I think that there is a quality of being and creating what I would call sacred space for someone to really feel safe, to feel held, to feel supported, to be able to unburden without having shame triggered, without having judgment. I do think 23 years of sitting with people in total confidentiality really provided that beautifully for me.
How about then, you've referenced a couple times being a brain nerd, and I know the brain has, like, a ton of stuff going on in it that usually is just trying to keep us from living or dying, keep us alive, keep us from dying. But let's go into some of your brain nerdiness just for fun.
Mhm. Okay. Well, one of the things that really struck me as I began to work with, extremely successful and wealthy individuals is how unhappy they really can be. So, how aware are you, Gabe, of the happiness research that's come out of positive psychology in the last decade?
A little bit. I've read a few different books regarding it over the last couple years.
Well, with your permission, let me share a few basics. I think your listeners might not have read a couple of books. Would it be okay?
Please, please do.
All right. So, the happiness research really says that 50% of your happiness is based on your genetic wiring. So that's what's passed down through our genes from our parents and our ancestors. 10%, which seems like a very small percent, is circumstances. Which means actually, as a coach, we have a lot more grit than we think. We think, oh, if I had $1 million, life would be amazing. Or you lose your job and you think, oh, the world's going to hell. My life is a mess. It's never going to recover. The truth is, actually, we're much hardier than we think we are. The 40% that's left is the part that as a coach I love to play with. Do you want to guess what it is? You might know.
I'm gonna play dumb. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So the 40% that's left is your choice about how you show up. It's your intentional thoughts, what you choose to do with your actions, your behaviors, and your mindset. So there's a lot of 40% is huge if you think about it. There was a study, and hopefully this really rings true for your listeners, because there was a study done by Brickman Coates and Janeth Bowman, where they interviewed and measured happiness levels of people who had just won the lottery and people who were paralysis victims. And believe it or not, after a certain amount of time, the lottery winners and the paralysis victims defaulted back to what their general level of happiness was prior to those events happening, which supported the finding, that belief of circumstances play a small part. If we can wrap our brains around that, that really gives us, it empowers us to say, okay, well, what do I have control over? Sometimes we have control over the circumstances and sometimes we don't. I used to not know very many millionaires or multimillionaires. Now I know a bunch, and several of them are miserable. So being able to hold that mirror up and support people in saying, what do you actually want to create? What's the point of being a millionaire if you're not going to enjoy it? It's all kind of interesting. I think the latest research I saw was, are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy?
Yep.
So basics needs met up to self-actualization at the top. And actually, before he died, Maslow had a sixth level, which was transcendence, but that part didn't get published. But what I read in the most recent research was, in America, once you are making annually 80 to $100,000 a year, you can't buy happiness. Basically, to say, once your needs are met and the basic wants, everything after that becomes the hedonic treadmill. So our needs and wants just grow to meet how much money we're making.
Yeah, I see that all the time. I have to go back. What was the name of the book? That was it Beckman Coates? What was the name?
Oh, it was a research study. It wasn't a book. It was by Brickman Coates and Janeth Bowman.
Okay. There's a book I read. Does this name sounds familiar? I think it was The Happiness Advantage. Is that the book?
I
Yeah.
bet they were cited in it. I don't know if they were the authors.
Okay. They might have been cited in it because the stuff that you're sharing, I'm like, wait a second, I read that book because I think I read that book in the last couple of years, and I remember that reasoned. And this is what's basically sitting with me on that is it's our choice. Like you said, it's our choice. And there's a book I read every single day, and it's called The Daily Stoic. I'm on the second reading of it now because I bought it a couple years ago. So I read it a whole year, and now I read it again. It's just a daily, and it's the information from Marcus Aurelius and Seneca. It's the old Stoics, and it's amazing how much it's all about your reasoned choice about this whole life. And this is from thousands of years ago. They were telling themselves this. That's the crazy thing. It's like, come on, we're people here. We got this really amazing brain going on, and we still can't figure out the basics. It seems like.
Gabe, what do the Stoics say? So I've read some Stoicism, and I'm certainly interested in it. It makes total sense because I've listened to a lot of your podcasts. I think you really have a brilliant, creative, curious mind, so that totally aligns with Stoicism. What did they say about intuition and instincts?
The intuition and the instincts are, I guess the best way I'll do it is I'll put it in my words. It's trusting the whispers. It's trusting the whispers. And then that intuition and the instincts, but to also not get too far ahead of yourself is the other piece that I've gathered out of it. And maybe I'll add one more is don't get too much of yourself.
Mhm.
The piece I read just in the last couple of days was talking about how don't get too much of yourself. You're going to end up in the same dirt hole that your mule driver was going to end up in. And so that intuition is listen to the whispers, the instincts, trust those, but don't get too full of yourself was the gathering that I've gotten.
Yeah, so that feeling of not getting too full of yourself may also be maintain perspective. And I think as a coach, it's one of the gifts we can bring to clients. And I suspect you bring all kinds of perspective to the people who you work with as well, because you are knowledgeable and well seasoned and have complex pattern recognition when it comes to money and what people need to do. So that perspective allows us to step out of our ego and observe what's really going on and maybe check in with our body and our intuitive longings, our desires, our gut instincts. I think all of that informs us very, very deeply as we move through life if we let it.
Yeah, we actually, and I'll have this in a series called a "What's Next" series that I think we're going to have you back in for. But there's a story that I'm going to tell of a whisper that came to me in the summer of 2021 that has now created another business, a whole movement, a whole bunch of exciting stuff that I will hold and share down the road. But it was all because of whisper that had come to me that I just had enough space in my brain that it snuck in and it took hold. And it reminds me of a book, and maybe you've even read this book. It was called Big Magic.
Yeah. No, I haven't read it, but I've heard it's funny, it's like the 3rd time I heard it, must be time for me to read that one. I'm right.
Yeah, but it was Big Magic, and I believe it was by, and I don't remember her name all of a sudden, but it's the author who wrote Eat, Pray, Love.
Oh, yeah.
And I just finished reading that book here in the last month or two, and it was all about the big magic of the whispers and how this creativity will bounce around until it finds a home that someone is willing to take action with it. And she tells the story of this book that she was writing. And she ends up meeting an author friend of hers, and she's telling her about the book idea that she just let go. And this other author was writing the exact same book.
Hmm.
And they were like, "Are you kidding me?" Well, I let it go. And the other one, it bounced into her. So, I mean, it's interesting on how our brains work, how our whispers work, how our intuitions and our gut instincts, and how that all comes together.
Well, what you just shared really made me think about a couple things that I could share about clients and leveraging brain science.
Mhm.
Often, when I've had clients come to me, people come to coaching generally about 48% of the time. It really is that they want a confidential sounding board, that they have an idea or they're in transition, they have something they want to bring forth. And listening to the whisper and giving it space is kind of the gift of coaching. I like to use appreciative inquiry in my coaching, which really is if I can ask the best inspirational clients for that client that leads them to see something in the future that's possible. It opens up the door of possibility for them. Then they are pulled into that future, that ideal vision of their future, instead of running away from something in the past. So I'll give an example. I had a client come to me. He had had a partner. He was the operations person, and he worked with a partner who was the visionary. And they built an incredible business together, sold it for $100 million. S- s- split split what they made. And this client came to me and he said, "I have this idea." And it was a whisper of an idea. And even though he'd, by all accounts, been incredibly successful, he really vulnerably shared with me and said, "I am just scared. I don't know if I can do this on my own. I did it when somebody else was the visionary, but now I really want to do it. I want to prove I can do it myself." That entrepreneurial spirit, the willingness to take the leap into the unknown. And what's amazing about that is we actually worked together 4 years. And not only did we take this whisper of an idea, incubate it, and he has created something incredible that's way is worth way more what his first business was worth. it has multiple aspects to it, and each of those businesses is worth so many things, and he's living his best life. So he's not that involved in operations, he's hired beautiful people, he gets to be the strategic visionary, and he still gets to go home and coach his kids' baseball team, and he still gets to go and take the vacations with his wife and family, and he's really led a created life by strategically giving himself the gift of that space and that time to really nurture what those whisperings were. And we had a really beautiful partnership. And so I think some of what I like to do is leverage what naturally happens so that we can take advantage of what we're doing anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's amazing. And I bet I can see him being, to go back to this client, I can see him being a little scared. And even though he's got, $37.5 million after taxes, if you did the math quickly,
Right.
whatever it might be, I'm being facetious, but even though he's got all the money he'll ever need, um, he was never the visionary before. And so for him to step out and be the visionary after being the integrator, that is a big difference. So amazing work on his part, amazing work on your part to help nurture that and get him into a place. And then I love the fact that he's coaching his kids' teams, he's traveling, he's having a great life, because
Yes.
that's what this is all about.
It absolutely, and even in business, and I can't wait to see, like, where this goes, because then we'll have the true ROI, but in his life, the ROI has been such joy, fulfillment, satisfaction, and the role he gets to play at work, it's truly zone of genius, and I'll tell you what, his zone of excellence as an operator was freaking amazing. So you could easily live your whole life thinking that's your zone of genius if you didn't listen to the whispers.
Hmm. Yeah, amazing. Absolutely amazing. We could probably talk for hours because I'm having just a blast, but we probably should move into some money questions because this is a
Okay.
podcast about money. And I'll give you a chance here at the end that if there's some more stuff you'd like to share, we'll go there. But this is a podcast about money. There's three questions I ask every single person regarding money. First question is what's the smartest thing you've ever done regarding money? And tell me that story.
Well, actually, I thought about this a lot. I love your questions. I've listened to a lot of people answer these questions. I think the smartest thing that I did and we did as a couple, I've been married 27, almost 28 years, and I'm still in love and like my spouse. So that's just fantastic. But one of the things we did when I got my first job out of grad school, which parenthetically, terrible job, not a good boss, really miserable kind of what you might expect for a first job out of the gates. But he had the wisest piece of advice for us, and we actually listened and did it, which was go work with a financial advisor. So when I graduated, and we both graduated grad school, my husband and I both had our first jobs. We met with a financial advisor, and we started investing very early. Um, so I think that was brilliant. So we did Ross, we did IRAs, we did the whole thing, all whole slew of things. I've always been self-employed almost all of my career. And then we had a really interesting circumstance. I don't know if it's interesting. It was tragic. We had a really good, one of my closest friends' husband died unexpectedly when our children were both under a year old. And that really catapulted me to plan for my son's future. So we invested, we got life insurance, we had a will, we invested in we made investments for our son for school, for college, and just for life. And all of that has been beautiful because that's kind of been working in the background, and it's a long game. So if we started that at 25 and I'm 51 now, that's had a long time to play out when maybe a lot of people don't do that till they're older.
Oh, unfortunately, a lot do not. A lot of people. wait until they feel like they don't have a choice and they have to start saving and start investing and doing additional things in college education, et cetera. Thankfully, I mean, most of the clients that I work with are of a certain level that they're realize that they just need somebody to help them. But
Yeah.
there are a whole lot out there that don't, which is really unfortunate because it's a very simple, easy thing to get started.
Well, and similar to maybe saving, because that those wheels were just in motion,
Hmm.
we didn't live without it, or it didn't feel like we were living without anything because we hadn't had it.
Right.
And so we just I think it was brilliant advice and has been really, really beneficial.
Yeah. It was brilliant advice. It was very smart on your part. So very smart. Yes.
Yeah.
Second one, what's the biggest mistake you've ever made regarding money? And tell me that story.
So let me just give a little bit of background, Gabe, for you. I'm intuitively very good with money. I save money easily. We generally, because of how I was brought up in my adult life, I would save money and then spend it. So even if we wanted to do big purchases or big trips, I'm a quality time person, so I love experience. So I'd much rather spend money on trips and adventures than things. Um, so I think in general, I've also been quite conservative. So my credit score usually is between 840 and 850. Like I'm just a conservative money spender. So the biggest mistake I would say that we ever made is we had purchased a home, which I loved. And at the time, we thought it would be a forever home, and it was a historic home built in 1906.
Mm.
And at the time, we thought, "Oh, let's make this our forever home." We probably spent 3 times, maybe even 4 times the value of the house renovating, making it exactly what we want. And then when I had that, incredible pivotal lunch, we moved. And
Ah,
so, um, I think that even our financial advisor who we worked with at the time had said, "Well, if this is where you're gonna live, make it be yours. Make it be what you want." But I think in looking back that, man, we could have used that money a whole lot of different ways that we probably had spent way too much there.
yeah. But I mean, you didn't know that pivotal lunch was coming. So, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Ooh.
So that gives us then, if there's a takeaway there, that takeaway would be, all right, try to always have a little extra set aside for what I call freedom. That little extra set aside for the freedom. So the last question I ask everybody is, what does mastering your finances mean to you?
I think for me, it's just total financial freedom. So, time right now is my inventory. So, being able to uncouple from that. I have a team who are fantastic world class coaches. So, being able to work with them. I'm currently in the middle of a research project and creating some intellectual property and putting my own thoughts out into the world. So, I do think being able to have that kind of flow, having reoccurring revenue, I think financial freedom will look like, hopefully, in this emerging chapter of life with my husband, being location indifferent, being able to be in different places and have my husband as part of the team. All of that is very fun and exciting to think about.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to dream those things and then put them into place.
Yeah, we're dreaming. So we're definitely, if we think about the appreciative inquiry process, it is dream and then it's design. So we're definitely in the dreaming phase because our son is almost done with college. We've paid for all of that without having any debt. So that'll be the next thing that I'm really looking forward to creating.
Oh, that's fun. That is a lot of fun. So, how can my listeners find you? What's the best way?
The best way, I'm on, several social media channels, but the best way is really go to our website, which is fruehlingcoaching.com. You can read about me. You can read about the Fibonacci project, which is something that I referenced about the research project that I'm doing with my impact leader clients and people who are just impact leaders who are neurodiverse. You can see the other team members and learn about the core values. You also can take a coaching journey questionnaire that might help you navigate, or potential clients navigate their journey.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And all of that will be in the show notes so that everybody can go click on those, check those out. Not a problem there. So I told you I'd give you some more time. If in fact there's some more information you'd like to share, so anything else you would like to share.
Well, one of the things you asked me about earlier in the interview, and we lost the thread of that part of our discussion, was how to leverage what your brain does naturally. So, one of the tricks that I know that happens with brain science is that if I can ask the best question and create this vision for someone of their future, or of what they want to create for themselves, the reticular activator actually goes into effect. So, the reticular activator is this part of your brain that has evolved. And if we think about the millennia of caveman, Cro Magnon man, how it worked, it's the part of your brain that scans the environment and selects what's relevant to pay attention to. So I really like to use this with clients. The best example that I could think of would be, I don't know, Gabe, if you ever thought you were going to buy a new car, or you were picking out a color for a car, what happened?
You see it everywhere you go.
Yes. So I remember that. Always cars is a great thing to think about. Or when we first decided we wanted to conceive, I was stunned. I was 30, and because I built my first career, and, all of a sudden, everywhere I went, there were pregnant people because your brain just naturally selects what's relevant. So when we do that with our future, with our dreams, things occur to us differently. So, for example, my client who had this idea of, oh, I want to create this, immediately as we talked about it and he got more and more clear of what he wanted to create, he noticed different things like a conversation with this person. Oh, wait, they have a salesperson who might be perfect for this role. Uh, and he would ask, could you make an introduction? Or you're reading something and it sparks your creativity. You think, oh, wait, maybe that connects with this. It changes how you interact without you having to do anything other than create what it is that you want. We know that people who write down their goals, I don't know if you've read this research, and I can't cite it for you right this second, but there was a great research study of billionaires, and they, regardless of where they came from, socioeconomic background, ethnicity, regardless of all that, there was one thing that they all had in common. Do you know what it was?
I'm going to say written goals.
Yes, they all had, and it wasn't like they wrote it and they put it away somewhere. It was a living, breathing document that they interacted with, weekly or monthly. Like it was something that they were very tuned into. And that's that beautiful hyper focus that allows people then to really get clear on what's my yes, where's my energy go, and what's my no, and say no to everything but these things that my goals are focused on. So the reticular activator naturally does that if you're clear on what it is that you want.
Yeah, interesting. There's an exercise called a success shifter that I got from the coaching program that I was involved in with for a bunch of financial advisors, and it was, list the things that you need to be doing on a daily basis so that they're always, and you check it every day. Well, one of the things I did is I wrote the goals and the vision of my life across the top of it so that I see it every single morning. Like, how many hours a week do I want to work? What do I want to do? How many trips do I want to take? The condo on the beach? I mean, all those things are on there. So every single morning I read that same thing. And it's amazing how your brain, like you said with your client, you start picking up on these things. Oh, this is next. This is next. So,
So that's a great activity for the doing.
mhm.
What are the action steps and what's the vision? There's something even deeper I would propose, which is your way of being in the world. So when I think about, when we talked about my clientele, often they are hyper achievers, like they get so much done, more done over in an hour than most of us do in a week. Um, there's this opportunity then to let go of having to do and sink deeper into being. How do I want to be in the world? How do I want to show up? What really matters? What kind of a father or leader or spouse do I want to be in? And what matters the most? It's not always about checking things off the to do list, it's also about your soul, your energy, and people in the coaching world might say how you be, the being of you. So I like that as well.
Yeah, very much so. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
The only other thing that might be great for me to share and for you to hear and your listeners to hear is that I have been doing this Fibonacci research project named after the Fibonacci mathematical sequence we talked earlier. And I am looking for impact leaders with who are highly successful. I'm measuring that loosely in terms of finances. So I'm looking to interview millionaires and more who are also neurodiverse, who have that unique zone of genius. Often, what I learned, or what I'm learning about my clientele, like ADHD, OCD, are both 2% or less in the adult male population. Most of my clients are men. And I noticed, gosh, I think every single client I've had could fall into this neurodiverse category of something like this, or they just have this unique zone of genius. And I realized that that unique zone of genius is part of what is making them rich. It's part of
Mhm.
what allows them to be so successful. So I'm doing these interviews, qualitative interviews. Then I've got a researcher coding the data so that it will become quantitative. And hopefully, I'll write a book with the findings. And the goal of that is to serve my clients more deeply.
That makes total sense. That's the beauty of the book.
Well, so I was just going to say, if you have a listener who thinks, oh, I fall into this category, I'm super interested, there's a tab on the website that explains that exactly. And you can just reach out to me through the email there and say, hey, I'm interested in this if you are. Or you can go through the contact us form.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Well, Sarah, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you being on Solopreneur Money today.
It's been a delight. Thanks for having me, Gabe.
Well, solopreneurs, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Sarah as much as I did. My three takeaways are as follows. One, discover and embrace your zone of genius. Two, remember that 40% of our happiness is as a result of our own choice. And number three was the science behind the laws of attraction. And think about that. Billionaires, the one thing they have in common is they have goals that are written down that they review somewhat regularly, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, or whatever. But that law of attraction and the science behind the law of attraction to help you achieve the things that you're trying to in this world. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for listening. Please share this podcast with a friend. Have a great day.